Good morning, everyone. I'm Kate Chubbuck. I'm Vice President for Education, and it is my honor today to introduce Little Island, More Than Meets the Eye, with renowned landscape architect Signe Nielsen. This is also our 2024 Andrew Carnegie Distinguished Lecture, made possible by the generous support of the Carnegie Corporation of New York, in addition to being the final installment in our 2024 Winter Lecture Series. The Winter Lecture Series, which is currently in its 24th year, has been curated by our landscape design program coordinator, Susan Cohen, who is in the audience. Susan, thank you for all that you do for the garden. We couldn't do all of this without you. As we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the New York Botanical Garden is located on the ancestral homeland of the Lenape, Delaware people. We honor them and acknowledge their displacement, dispossession, and continued presence. In addition to today's program, the New York Botanical Garden offers many classes, workshops, and seasonal offerings year-round in landscape design, floral design, gardening, and more. As we get started, I want to just highlight a few of our upcoming events that might be of interest to you. This month, in fact yesterday, we launched our newest program, Plant Studio. These flexible online courses provide an opportunity to explore gardening, landscape design, botany, and more from the comfort of your own space. If you're here today, I particularly recommend Landscape Design History for Beginners, which actually includes Little Island as part of its lecture, as a virtual tour of the world's most iconic gardens. And the courses officially start next week. We are also excited to be welcoming Andrew Garn in conversation with NYBG's very own Michael Hagan on wildflowers of New York City in celebration of Earth Day on April 20th, and that will be here in Ross Hall. And the last event I want to note is that on June 8th, as part of our summer exhibition, Wonderland Curious Nature, we will be hosting a symposium on English gardens as well as wild garden design with renowned writers Ambra Edwards and Keith Wiley, who will be coming here from the UK. So stay tuned as that event is not yet posted to our website, so you're the first to know. Today, our guest is Signe Nielsen, who has been practicing as a landscape architect and urban designer in New York since 1978. Her body of work has renewed the environmental integrity and transformed the quality of spaces for those who live, work, and play in New York City. Signe believes in using design as a vehicle for advocacy to promote discourse on social equity and community resilience, and she has served on multiple panels to effect positive change. And although I was going to say this later, I think that's my cue to say, please silence your cell phones. Thank you. Everyone wants to be able to hear Signe. Born in Paris, Signe forged her own path from an early age. She first started out as a professional ballet dancer, actually, which explains some of her agility. The rigorous training and commitment to beauty served as a good foundation for a career in landscape design. As an undergraduate at Smith College, she designed her own major in urban planning. She holds advanced degrees in landscape architecture from the City College of New York and in construction management from Pratt. She is currently a professor of urban design and landscape architecture at Pratt Institute, where she continues to mentor new generations of designers. A fellow of the American Society of Landscape Architects, Signe is the recipient of over 100 national and local design awards for public open space projects, including the 2018 American Institute of Architects George S. Lewis Award. Her work has been published extensively in national and international publications, and she's authored a number of books, including Sky Gardens, High Performance Infrastructure Gardens, Guidelines with Hillary Brown, Cool and Green Roofs, and Sustainable Site Design Manual, among others. She's the founding principal at Matthew Nielsen Landscape Architects, where she has designed and supervised the construction of more than 240 million worth of projects, including waterfront parks, campuses, and urban facilities in the United States and abroad. A key feature of her urban design is taking on existing underutilized industrial sites, as you will see in this lecture, and reimagining how they can be repurposed and redesigned for a more resilient future. This morning, Signe will be discussing Little Island, a collaboration between her firm and the UK-based Heatherwick Studio. Little Island opened in May 2021 at the former site of Manhattan's Pier 54 on the Hudson River. Highly recommended if you haven't been there already. It offers a new experience for New Yorkers to explore trails through trees and plantings overlooking the water, as well as enjoying spaces for both leisure and performance. So without further ado, please help me welcome Signe Nielsen.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out on this soggy day, but without rain, there's no plants. So much appreciated. Let's get right into it. And thank you for that very generous introduction, which I believe Susan Cohen had something to do with, and Kay for delivering it so beautifully. As was just mentioned, Little Island was formerly a pier in Hudson River, and it's actually part of the larger Hudson River Park. And the pier itself sits underneath a historic arch that was the entryway to the passenger ship terminal that was located at that pier. The pier itself was deteriorating and finally saw its end after Hurricane Sandy. And it's probably best known as a passenger ship terminal for delivering the survivors of the Titanic back to the city. But fast forward, the pier was destroyed beyond hope after the hurricane. The Hudson River Park Trust was kind of out of money, I have to say, and so they reached out to a donor who is also a very generous donor to the High Line, and asked whether he would be interested in funding a pavilion on the reconstructed pier. And the donor said, no, I'd like to do better than that. I'd like to have a competition, just a small competition that I will direct, and really kind of take over the project and the funding for it. And so originally it was envisioned to be about $35 million. Fast forward, the total construction was $260 million. So it is an extraordinary donation to the city of New York, and really was just to be very clear about this is a rendering, as you can see, from 2014, and remarkably looks quite like that rendering. So it is part of Hudson River Park, and it is leased to Little Island as a 501c3. So be aware that it has to comport with the Hudson River Park Act and with all of the regulations that direct Hudson River Park. So here it is completed, as was just said. It opened in May 2021, both day and night. It is magical at night. The lighting designers were Fisher Morant Stone, and they used the trees essentially as to provide the ambient lighting, and then there are path and step lights. It's really brilliant lighting design. Now, as was said, it takes a village to build a project of this magnitude. Nothing like it structurally, horticulturally had really ever been done before. And so this is just a smattering of some of the key people and key firms that were part of the project. I will point out the donor. And that also should give you a hint that he was very actively involved in the design throughout the process. There are many, many people to thank, but now that the house lights have gone down, I did want to acknowledge that there are 3 people in the room today who, without them, Little Island would not be as beautiful as it is today. That's Oren, Jennifer, and Vlad. They all come from the horticultural group. Let us... Oren is a graduate of this fine institution, and he is the director of horticulture. And I just have to say, it is a daily pleasure for me to work with the horticultural staff. And one of the things that, as the design process was going along, well, the donor asked me, I'll just call him Barry because that's what his name is. Barry said to me, Signe, I want a beautiful landscape. and I want it to be instantly beautiful. And I said, well, you know that means I'm going to overplant it. He said, fine. And I said, but I'm going to need people to care for it. And he said to me one day, how many gardeners do you want? So I said 4. I got 3, 3.5. Oren also works in the garden. So that is, so in addition to this extraordinary donation of construction, there is 20 years of guaranteed maintenance, and that includes the horticultural staff as well as visitor services and others. So, as I said, hearty congratulations to everyone involved in this project. So let's get into the design. I think while Thomas Heatherwick, the architect for the structure, thought about the structure as a flying carpet, I thought about the landscape as a leaf, actually a dried leaf, floating in water, and you'll see why, because the upturned corners of the dried leaf have a lot to do with some of the environmental issues we had to solve. So, this is it was 8 years in design, 3 years in construction. Some of that overlapped, and so it's very difficult to cram this experience into an hour, but I'm going to do my very best and only focus on these kind of 3 topics. So, speaking about the resiliency, so what we learned from Hurricane Sandy is that the esplanade that you approach and that runs the entire length of Hudson River Park was under about 6 feet of water. And so if one was going to try to rebuild a pier, it really needed to be at a much higher elevation, which means we had to sever it from land. It was the first pier that is ever severed from land. You can see that the other piers are perpendicular and connected to land. So that's what brought about these what are called bridges, but they're actually pile supported. And they bring you up from the esplanade 10 feet. So that 10 feet really gets us out of projected sea level rise as well as storm surge. So that's the reason for it being out in the middle of the water, and I guess why it's called an island. I never really bought that one, but anyway. And now talking about the curled leaf part, this is the southwest corner. It is the highest elevation in the pier. It's 62 feet above mean high water, and it was done primarily to get sunlight, southwestern sunlight, underneath the pier for the benefit of marine habitat. Because the concern was that this square, right, I should have said this before, but the pier is no larger than the footprint of the pier that was removed. But instead of being a rectangle, it's a square. It is, in plan view, a little more than 2 acres, but because of the topography, it adds a full 1/4 of an acre to the land area, which was obviously essential to realize during planting design, or I would have been way off on my plant counts. There's another lovely story, which actually was coincidental. It was not part of the original concept, of so many of the materials and fabricators and contractors were all from the New York area. And on the top left are the pieces of the pots. So they're made up of 5 of those pieces, makes one of these. And so the pieces were cast in upstate New York. They were then shipped to another assembly yard in upstate New York on the Hudson River, and put together as whole. We call them pots. Some people call them tulips. Some people call them champagne flutes. Some people call them elephant butts. So you can call them whatever you want. And down at the bottom, and all of the wood was New York State black locust. All of the stone came from Champlain stone in upstate New York. And there you see the pier under construction. Because actually you're probably here more for the plants than the construction, but the construction was so fascinating. So there's a very high percentage of natives and intraspecies diversity. I will say, however, it is not exclusively a native garden. Some of the criteria that were important is, first of all, using trees that had been successful in other parts of Hudson River Park. That really had a track record of success. Second of all, there is a certain aspect of a maritime habitat that was necessary to focus on. So it is not a 100% native. I would say it ranges in the percentage of natives depending on whether we're talking trees, shrubs, perennials, grasses. So there'll be a slide on that later. So as I said, even though this is out of harm's way in theory, we did still have to be cognizant about the maritime conditions as well as climate extreme. I will say again, because we're all plant nerds here, that I opted for zone 6 plants because I was concerned about cold from the bottom as well as cold from the top. And so Oren and I have tried a couple of zone 7 perennials and grasses just as a test, and so far they're doing okay, but for the most part, the trees and shrubs are all zone 6. What I'm really thrilled about, as a designer, you try, and you don't know if you're going to succeed. And in this case, I really put a lot of effort into thinking about bird migration and habitat. And so when we walk around the garden, we're very pleased. Oren knows these, he knows every type of bee. It's incredible. But and one of the other folks who works at Little Island is also a birder. And so when he comes on our walks, he is always pointing out different birds. So it's been very gratifying to see that the diversity is actually working. And we do have a resident red-tailed hawk. As I mentioned before about the lighting, it is dark sky compliant. And really it's just the surfaces that you walk on that are illuminated to a correct, safe level. As I thought about, honestly, I didn't think, I was so busy designing and so busy worrying about everything that I never really thought about how people were going to use it ultimately. Yes, of course, I thought about it, but it's been just the joy for a landscape architect, I think, is to see people use your sites in ways that you hadn't even imagined. And so it's just wonderful to see people kind of frolicking, painting, playing the piano, strolling, running, all, just impromptu dancing. It's such a joy. And I will say that Little Island is very cognizant, as you'll see here, of programming the performance spaces to attract diverse audiences and to draw from the local community as playwrights, artists, musicians, dancers, and singers, as you see here. I guess one thing I should have said, that during the high point of construction, this project employed over 1,000 people in the state of New York. Okay, now let's get to choreography. And I understand that Susan snuck in the fact that I used to be a professional dancer. And so I do think a lot about choreography. But I was also motivated to think about choreography because we had to create universally accessible routes to some of these to all the high points everywhere in the park. And so there's a lot of path, a lot of path. And I began thinking, well, how am I going to make this sort of schlepping up and down the paths an interesting experience? So that's where I started thinking about choreography. And so we started out early on. It's really early drawing. You'll notice there you only see paths, not stairs, and those come later, where you can find views. So sometimes the views are into the park, and sometimes the views are out to the river, to the skyline, etc. So that, depending on where you are, what elevation you are in the park, it really does change your perception of what's around you. So that's what got me thinking about choreography. So somewhere down the road, I suggested to the team that if we only had one way up and one way down, we were really kind of repeating the High Line experience, and that we needed shortcuts. And so for the able-bodied. So we added stairs, and that kind of turned us into this sort of chutes and ladders concept. So this is more like the final plan of the layout of the available routes. So again, in thinking about the choreography, there are times when you're walking sort of lower than the high points, and you see your perception is of the internal part of the park. At other points, it's both internal and external, and then at other points, it's completely external. And that, I think it's that variability that every time you come around a bend or come to the top of a stair, you have a different perception of the park and the park's relationship to the context. And I think also, or many people have said to me anyway, that the park feels much bigger than its 2.4 acres because you're experiencing a lot of movement. And then to get up to the high point, this is a funny little anecdote. We are ascending about 48 feet from the elevation of the arrival point of the park. And originally, the architect and Barry wanted that southwest corner to be higher by about 10 feet. And I simply could not lay out a universally accessible path in the distance available. And so I tried and tried and tried. And finally, I walked into a meeting and I said, Barry, I can't do it. So he said to me, well, God damn it, Signe, how high can we get? And I said, 62 feet. And he thought like the world had collapsed, but at the end of the day, it's really fine. I think it's fine. I'm not sure what 10 feet more would have done for the experience, but it sure would have screwed up the landscape, I can tell you that. And then you get to the top, and it's really amazing. You have this extraordinary view of the New York Harbor, and as you can see, there's kind of no plants up there because they are irrelevant to the context. I mean, Oren and I tried desperately to keep the 4 plants alive up there, but it's all people really want to do is experience that view, and so that's also fine. But this is the view to the southwest, and you can see the path winding up. You can also see some of the stairs that provide shortcuts, and it's really thrilling, the seasonal change in the landscape. But what I've noticed is that when people are walking uphill, they tend to look down to make sure that they have a sure footing on either the paths or the stairs. So I tried to put a lot of more delicate plants down where you would notice them as you were walking uphill. But then when you're walking downhill, since you've already been uphill, you have a better sense of your footing, and so you have more of an opportunity and a tendency to look outward. So there's basically that same view that you saw before in the fall here in the summer. And then every path leads to a destination. And this one is in the kind of southeast area, and we call it the Glade. It's a rather intimate performance area, but it's also a lovely place for a small group of people to gather and chat. There are also some places to sit along the way, and all of the seating, including this here, is made out of black locust. This was custom carved by a group of woodworkers from the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Now, to the topic that probably matters most to you, which is seasonal change and delight. So when I first started thinking about this landscape, there were kind of two things that were directives of the plant selection. And one is the slope, the orientation of that slope, its relationship to wind, and then what you can do on that slope. There are some slopes that are simply too steep to access. Sorry. Some of the slopes face north. Some of the slopes face south, east, et cetera, et cetera. So we kind of zoned it according to that illegible legend at the top. But basically, that was how I kind of started in my plant research and plant selection, was by this kind of combination of microclimate and usability of the area. So the sections, I don't know if you can read sections, but the key thing here to understand is that the pots are not filled with soil. They are simply structure. We had thought about putting soil in the pots, but then we couldn't figure out how to drain it without sort of brown goo dripping down the white columns. And so after a lot of thought, plus then we thought, what if a tree dies? How do we replace it? Stuck in a pot? Is there enough soil in the pot? Anyway, we abandoned that concept, not to mention the load. We couldn't actually get the load on those piles. So the 248 piles that support this structure each have a load capacity. And so the placement of trees and the soil to support those trees is very, very meticulously planned so that the weight bearing of the piles is not overtaxed. And so you can see that the soil depths range from as much as 6 feet to as little as about 18 inches. No trees are planted in 18 inches, but it is a highly orchestrated relationship between structure, load, and trees and soil. Now, the bottom section is a hint to the next group of slides. So, underneath the pier, in a certain part of the pier, is actually an occupiable space. And that's where, I'll just show you instead of talking. You can enter it here or there. And when you're down there, it's the most amazing view of these piles. It's really extraordinary. That is what is called kind of back of house space. There is access to all of the equipment that the horticulturalists use. Orrin is also in charge of snow removal, so that's where he keeps all of his snow removal equipment. It's where actors or performers can change their clothes. There's a green room, restrooms, et cetera, et cetera. And it's all tucked under the gigantic lawn, and it runs actually north-south through the pier. It's a magical space. I spent a year there because that was our also construction office. Yeah, I'll just stop there. So here are some statistics on the plants and the diversity of species. There are tens of thousands of plants in the garden. Oren's back there tearing his hair out. But they're really it's wonderful. We have lost a few species, but we've also added some. One of the delicious parts of the donation of maintenance is that we have a small budget for plant replacements. And so one of the things that I really enjoy doing with Oren is talking about what kinds of replacements we might do. We have lost a couple trees to oaks. They are specifically, it's a leaf scorch, and it's really not curable without regular injections, and we're not allowed to use any chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, because all of the water drains directly into the pier. But for the most part, all of the trees have survived. The shrubs have all done well. A few perennials haven't made it, but we just replace those as we go along. This is the actual final planting plan. So you see the large lawn. It is underneath that lawn that the back of house space runs. I'm going to just point it out. This is the entrance to the restrooms, and then you come out at the top. So it is all under here, and underneath the amphitheater that this back of house space is located. Now again, just because we're plant geeks, and as I said, Barry said, I want this to be instantly perfect. So we brought in trees as large as a 12-inch caliper, some of which weighed 14,000 pounds. We weighed them before they were picked up by the crane, so we knew which crane we needed. The trees were all geolocated on our plans so that the guy wires that hold their root balls in place are anchored to the concrete deck. So there was kind of no, could you move that over there? No, the trees were fixed. And as you can see, some of the trees were so large that they took up an entire flatbed. The majority of the trees came from Pennsylvania, eastern Pennsylvania, northern Maryland, or southern New Jersey. It was just, I mean, it was so exciting to watch these trees being planted. It was just the most exciting thing in the world. And what you can see in the lower left there is that we hadn't put in all of the soil, right? Because we wanted to do it in layers, right? So the trees come first. So we had to build up enough soil to support the tree, and then they were backfilled, and then came the shrubs, and then perennials, blah, blah, blah. But the root balls were so large that we actually used them as tables. You know, they were like this high. We planted Little Island. There you see the guy wires on the upper left, and then the strapping system over the root balls to which the guy wires are attached on the lower left. There you can see a tree being placed just on soil until the rest of it gets backfilled. I'll just keep going. So the construction, as I said, took 3 years, but the planting was done in 1 year. And it was done between March of 2020 and December of 2020. That was height of COVID, if you may recall. But it was, I'll just say, the way I survived COVID was being at the pier every day. And it was planted from the east side to the west side. So we were following right behind the finish construction with our planting. We also planted fall dig hazards out of season, and we talked to the nurseries about that, and so they oversized the root balls. So they got even bigger than 14,000 pounds. Sorry? Oh, I thought I heard something. So anyway, we did truly plant some trees out of season. This next one, I kind of didn't do it in the right order, but so on the upper left, because of the weight limitations again, where we didn't need a lot of soil depth, we filled it with styrofoam. Then here you see the soil now having been backfilled. Then the lawn sod went in, and then now it's open to the public. So there's another element, or now let's get into the plant design a little bit. So because each of the four corners of the pier have very different solar orientations, as I pointed out before, that meant that the plant material would be different in those four corners. And then I began thinking to myself, well, it's going to look a little Disney-esque here if every corner is a different landscape. So I decided that we would have something called the bloom sweep, and that would kind of tie it visually together. So the bloom sweep is roughly from elevation 16, which is where you come in from the bridges. You get to elevation 16, and it goes up to about elevation 25. So that band that you see when you walk in is kind of unites the four corners. So we did these renderings because the donor obviously wanted to know what he was going to get. And so I very proudly presented these, maybe the best renderings my office has ever done, because they are dead accurate to the plants. It isn't just like, mush here, a little Photoshop there. It's really the plants. And so I presented that, these plans, these renderings, and Barry said to me, Signe, come closer with that. Because it was on a board, it was printed on a board, in addition to being on a screen. And I brought it closer, and he looked at it, and he said, Signe, I hate the color purple. So he said, why did you pick purple? Mind you, by the way, I was wearing purple stockings and a purple scarf. And thought I might as well dress the part, right? So he said, why did you pick purple? And I said, because it's the only perennial flower that I can think of, including, and bulbs too, that start in March, or even late February, and go all the way through November. Starting with purple crocus and ending with asters, and everything in between. So he said, well, think again. He's very direct. So I thought again, and what I decided to do is calibrate the color palette to temperature. So in the spring, it's generally kind of cool colors. As the summer moves on, the colors get more and more intense. And then in the fall, of course, they become the muted versions of themselves. And that's how I ended up doing it. This is roughly the color palettes. There still are distinctive colors in the four quadrants. And I will say that we did these color charts. This is only for one quadrant. It's impossible to read this, just forget it. It's just to make sure that I had something, more than one thing blooming at any time. Like, in order to attract pollinators, you need like 5 or 6 different things blooming at the same time. Plus Barry said, I want color. So I actually got photographs of every single plant that I was proposing to use, and I lined my conference room wall to wall by trees, shrubs, blah, 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 by quadrant. And I gave Barry, I invited him down to my office, gave him a magic marker, and I said, well, I want you to cross out every plant you don't like. So he starts in spring of, I don't know what corner, gets the pen. And then he stood back. He stood back and he sort of got, looked at the whole array and he said, I get what you're trying to do here, Signe. And he stopped crossing out purple. But obviously, I did tone it way down. So then, thinking about all good planting design, you need structure, and then you need seasonal effect. So these are just us kind of studying that in the different seasons, and then you really get a sense of the color change over the seasons, and then what are the evergreens that are going to kind of hold the structure. And in addition to evergreens, we also have a lot of bark, especially in shrubs, and a lot of textures. And Orrin and the gardeners know that we will keep the dried seed heads on and keep the grasses for as long as they look reasonable before the buzz cut in February, which just finished. These are the final renderings of the four seasons. The primary use of evergreen trees is in the north and the northeast, largely to block the the northern winds, and also to screen the highway from your view. Otherwise, there's a lot of evergreen smaller shrubs throughout the park. Let me just see how we're doing here. This is supposed to end at noon. Oh, I'm in trouble. Okay. Radio. We're going to fly through the rest of this. I just wanted to give you like a little taste of each of the corners. So the northeast quadrant is comprised of these key features. This is what it looks like from the east. There you see the kind of belt of evergreens around it. You also notice that the amphitheater is completely invisible because of the topographic change. The planting concept is that along the pot edges, it's a higher proportion of grasses, and as you get deeper into the center of the park, the percentage of perennials increases, and that's pretty much consistent around all four quadrants. Here's just some flavor of sort of the muted spring colors there, and getting down into the bloom sweep. Looking at the northwest corner, this one you can see how challenging it was to get enough path length, and the plant beds are really very narrow. This was a really challenging area. Looking at it as you approach from the North Bridge, it was interesting that both Barry and the architect were enthusiastic about having plants spill over the pots. I thought that everyone would go, oh, I don't want plants in my pots, but they weren't. We don't have anything that clings to the pots, at least so far, but it's really kind of great. This is sort of a flavor of what the northwest looks like, and we're kind of coming down from the grassland down into the bloom sweep. This is one of my favorite views. So here we are very close to the pot edge, so it's almost 100% grasses. And this is the same view, obviously, in different months. And it's just so beautiful to watch the subtlety of change over time. And my joy of being able to go to the pier as often as I do to watch this change really occur. This part of the park uses super hot colors because it's a south-facing slope that would really wash out more subtle colors. And here's a place where you see the gradation or the intermixing of grasses and perennials as we get down to the bloom sweep. By the way, the retaining walls are all made out of sheet pile, weathering sheet pile, which is an industrial strength right out of a catalog. At first, when I showed this to Barry, he said, "Oh, yuck." He said, "Cover it up." So we have a lot of vines, and too many vines, frankly, and we're slowly, we realize that it's actually nice to have some contrast of green and the gorgeous weathering steel. And Barry has stopped complaining about the sheet piles. So we're slowly ripping off super aggressive vines. Here's some of the other colors in that northwest bloom sweep. Getting to the southeast corner, it has a very special feature, which is what I call the moon garden. It is that area here. It throats down, and you enter into this small performance space, the glade that you saw before. And Barry said, I want this to be really special. I thought, like, I'm out of special here. And I thought to myself, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I thought, well, I'll just make it all white. So it's all white until the day that the crepe myrtle bloomed, and it was pink. I'd asked for white, and one came in pink. And Orrin and I, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? We got to get rid of it. So it was a little oversight at the nursery. But anyway, here is the southeast corner. And again, really great fall color. The path system, again, is pretty twisty-turny to get up to this elevation, largely driven by the fact that you've got to get a fire truck underneath the pots to service the pier. So that elevation was dictated by a fire truck. We did add some what we call boulder scrambles at kind of the last minute. Barry said, "Signe, there's not enough whimsy here." Like, okay. All right, let's dissect the word whimsy for a while. And so in addition to our chutes and ladders, we also have boulder scrambles. And these are for really not the faint of heart. Because we'd already done all the grading, the paths were in. I couldn't manipulate the topography anymore, so it is what it is. Looking to the south entrance, here's where you see where the fire trucks can get through. But it also can make for a pretty spectacular arrival, coming under these pots and seeing the piles and everything. It's a very beautiful moment. And then when you get to the top, above where the trucks can pull in, because we also had to get all the construction vehicles in, everything came in through that one access way, you get this great view of the city. Again, looking at the plant palettes, the colors here are kind of yellows and, dare I say, purples, and some, hints of oranges, and again, that gradation from the edge of the pier being largely grasses to the interior being largely perennials. Some of the plants that are the color palettes that are used, and now the moon garden. So everything, as I said, is white, including the white birch, the white crepe myrtle, now that it's been replaced. And honestly, I have to say, Barry's never said to me, this isn't special. But we are quite meticulous about retaining the whiteness of it. And now the last, I'll make it, the southwest. So this is the crescendo from a height perspective and also from a view perspective. And just to make it really clear, this is what it looks like. You're way the hell above the water. It's really, now you can get the idea why Thomas Heatherwick thought about this as a flying carpet. But it's just so interesting what an architect thinks and what I thought with the dried leaf. But together it was an extraordinary collaboration, I have to say, and with the structural engineers. This part of the park actually slopes north, and so it shades itself. And so there are pockets in here that are really much more like a woodland garden. So here you're getting kind of a sense of that. We've got some cercis, which amazingly are surviving the wind. We've got some white cercis as well here in this shade garden. Oh, they're so beautiful against the sheet pile. I mean, it's really nice, if I may say so. But now, the conclusion. So I know some of you have been there, and if you haven't been there, I invite you to come. Oren or I or both of us would be happy to give you a tour. I know both of us do this with great regularity, and you can just. What I really like about the design, honestly, is the fact that it doesn't tell you what to do. You walk in. There's a little bit of signage, but it doesn't say go here first. You walk in and you just get inspired and you just decide, I'm tired. I'm going to sit down. Fine, you can do that. I heard about this overlook. It's just fabulous. And I'm going to go up there, get my selfie, and then I'm going to leave. You can do whatever you want at whatever pace you want. And the other thing about as a designer, you often think about handicapped access, but I realized that when we made the place universally accessible, and you can self-propel on a wheelchair here, but it's also for strollers, it's also for walkers, it's also for shopping carts. I mean, it's wheeled accessible, and it's really a joy to watch parents or caregivers with young children, particularly around mid-morning, come through the park. It's really delightful. Or you can just come specifically for one of the programming options. Many of them are free, and some are not. But there's also a ticketing bracket so that not everyone pays full fare. And there's an art cart for kids that they roll out. There's after-school programs. There's just amazing amount of important programming that goes on. And the gentleman who's responsible for this programming has really come to embrace the landscape as a major component of education. And that's been delightful. And you can just see people, on the lawns, in the plaza, in the shade, just enjoying themselves, and that's also really a joy for me. And then I'm going to end on this, which is the only recognition of the donor and this extraordinary contribution in the park, and it's a manhole, in a rather oddly shaped manhole. In the center of the plaza, and then there's a credit to other people who were significant in the design or the construction or the donation, and some of the political facilitators who made this happen. But if you do go there, take a moment and read what Barry wrote, the quote in the center, and it really expresses his joy for this project and the joy that he gives back to the city. And now you're maybe wondering what's going on on the upper right. So the design team wanted to thank Barry, and so we made him a custom set of crystal glasses in the shape of the pots. They're kind of hard to drink out of, but I have to say, when we gave them to Barry on just about a week before Christmas, after the park had opened, he was so touched. He said, "No one has ever given me anything like this," because it was obviously handcrafted by us. And anyway, it was very, very touching. And his wife, Dion von Furstenberg, because it is their foundation that supports all of the construction and the maintenance. So thank you. I'm not supposed to take questions. But Anyway, thank you very much. Please don't hesitate to reach out. A Little Island, by the way, has an extraordinary website, really informative, extraordinary website. And with Oren today is a woman named Jennifer, and she and I and Oren select photographs every month to go into the Bloom calendar. So if you want to know what's going on, you can check out our Bloom calendar. And we are expanding that Bloom calendar to now include other types of interest, as well as, pollinators that are attracted, birds, et cetera. So we're going to just keep building on this. But if you want to know about performances or the history of construction, or you can also get a guided tour by me on an audio thing. As Oren says, "Oh, Signe, there you are." Because my voice is on the recording. Anyway, please check out the website. Thank you. I think Kay wants to close up.
I think joy was the right note to end on. Signe, that was an absolutely spectacular talk. Thank you for also bringing some levity to the discussion. It's always amazing to be able to see behind the scenes and get a little bit of insight into how these incredible projects come together. I can speak from personal experience that Oren gives fabulous tours, and we are very proud to have him as a graduate of our School of Professional Horticulture. So thank you so much for coming. Please go see the garden. The magnolias are almost there, and this is, even in the rain, the garden is a beautiful place to be. Thank you.